Hello, we're the Conversation Stamford. I'm Gemma Holbert.
And I'm Sarah Jane Saunson.
We teach sex and relationships education in primary schools, and as a result of that, we find that lots of parents ask us, what resources do you recommend? What books can you share with me that will support me in talking to my child about puberty, growing up, and making a baby? So we're going to just introduce some of the resources that we found that we think are interesting, bring some points out about the books that we think you might want to know.
So I went along to our local bookshop. I also asked a few friends if they had any books that they'd used, and I had a little look online to see what was out there. So I want to start off with this one, Mummy Laid an Egg. Now, it's quite a sweet story for young children, and it does introduce the idea of sexual intercourse. I particularly like the page, if I can just find it, here, where it talks about some of the ways, and their words, that mummies and daddies can fit together. And I just like it because it's fun and it's colourful, and I really approve, if you like, of the idea of teaching children that sex is something that grown-ups do for fun. Yeah, it's not just about making babies, it's enjoyable and it's fun. So I did like that aspect of this book. And it does try and tries to bust a few of those myths around how babies are made, hence the title, Mummy Laid an Egg. However, I do have quite a big however with this book because it is very euphemistic. I had a particular problem with the page, and again, I'll just find it, describing how sexual intercourse takes place. I'll just read this page. Daddy has a tube. The seeds from the pods come out of it. The tube goes into Mummy's tummy through a little hole. To me, that is just not only inaccurate, Daddy doesn't have a tube and it doesn't go into Mummy's tummy. It's just really confusing and helpful. And I think this book is a bit of a sign of the times, in that traditionally people were really fearful of showing correct body parts, using the correct names.
And I suppose it's trying to make it more palatable for parents to talk about with their children when you don't need to.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with introducing correct terminology from birth. It's just like learning that our leg is our leg. We don't need to stop talking about tubes and tummies, because it's just really confusing, and they have to relearn that information later, and it's actually quite shocking then when they do. So it's a kind of a fun story, but for me, it's not a book to teach your children about sex and relationships or how babies are made. This one, Making a Baby, is really new. It's just been published.
I think what's lovely about this, particularly, are the illustrations.
The illustrations are lovely, and it's very inclusive. I'll just flick through so that you can, get rid of that. I'll just flick through so that you can get an idea of what we mean. So really inclusive, beautifully illustrated, really appealing for children of any ages. I've got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I wouldn't mind if any of them came across this book and flicked through it. It's really lovely. It's also it's not only inclusive in its illustrations, but it's very inclusive in the language that it uses. It uses correct terminology, and I really like that. So you can see in contrast, we've got anatomical drawings, we've got the correct names, vulva, penis, sperm.
I think it also is helpful because it shows adult bodies compared to children's bodies as well. Whereas the previous book, kind of, the bodies didn't really belong to children or adults, to be honest. But it shows the contrast. They can understand how their body develops through puberty and growing up.
I love the little details, the woman breastfeeding, things like that. And I also like the other book, it explains that actually sex is something that people do when they care about each other, and it's not just about making a baby. So it talks about sexual intercourse and how the sperm has to meet the egg through sex, and it shows you how that is done with a male and a female. It also goes on to explain that actually not every couple is made up of a male or female, or even a couple, and it actually doesn't use the words male or female. So it will talk about a person or a couple with sperm, or a person or a couple with egg. So that makes it really inclusive, and you can apply your own circumstances and your own context that apply to you, which can be really helpful.
It's also very inclusive in terms of race and in terms of disability as well.
Oh yeah, I think nobody could look at this book and feel that it didn't apply to them, that they weren't included, and that's so important, really important. And it really doesn't shy away from anything, but it's told in a really age-appropriate way. It's really accessible. I was really a big fan of this book. I particularly liked, where was a really nice page. Here we go. It says, to make a baby, you need 1 sperm, 1 egg, and 1 womb. But every family starts in its own special way. And you can see this illustrated here. And I love this. You and your family are amazing just how you are. I think that's really nice for any child to read. It doesn't shy away from some of the trickier conversations that you might need to have. It talks about transgender, it talks about miscarriage, and it talks about premature babies. And whilst you might not want to introduce these topics to your children, it's really helpful to have it here in age-appropriate, accessible language, if it applies to you particularly, or if your child starts asking about it. Because we always say, if they're asking you questions about it, they're old enough to understand about it. And so you should try and engage in the conversation with them. So that was Making a Baby.
So these ones are sort of a little bit more grown up. They're the sort of books that might be read by the child themselves as well as with you, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one here, The Boy's Guide to Growing Up, and there is a Girl's Guide to Growing Up as well. These are quite specific to puberty, and they're nice little introductions to the changes that are going to happen to the body as you go through puberty.
I think this is the book I personally will be choosing to use with my girl who's currently in year 4. Would have been happy to use it previous to now as well a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to put an age on it because of course these things happen to children at all different ages and they're all ready to kind of take on and hear the information at different ages. But certainly this has got the appeal of a younger child, pre-teen certainly. And it introduces how your body's going to change, the hormones. It also is nice, it focuses on appearance and managing your feelings, which often gets kind of forgotten, and the focus is always on the physical. So it's really nice that it, encourages you to talk to your friends, to speak up, to accept help, that sort of thing. It does talk about sexual intercourse and how babies are made. It tends to stick with the traditional way of making a baby, male, female, and sex. It doesn't really go into too much detail about how babies could be made in other ways. But it is inclusive in terms of its illustrations, in terms of race and body type.
And how does this one compare then? What sort of differences between the two?
So this one, I think, I went into the bookshop, our local bookshop, and this is the one that was on the shelf. And I think a lot of people looking for a book would go in, they'd grab something like this because it looks kind of about right. It's Usborne, we kind of trust Usborne. So this is Usborne Facts of Life Growing Up. I really wasn't keen on this book. On the one part, it was really detailed. So it contained a lot of information about the hormones and the hypothalamus and all this sort of thing, which I just...
So maybe appreciated by a particularly scientific child who's really interested in the how and whys of everything.
Absolutely. It's very much, it felt to me like a textbook. It wasn't particularly engaging, had quite a lot of information, and it's delivered in quite a dry way. It's sort of, it just didn't appeal to me particularly. Nothing really stood out about it. However, it does have, good factual information in it about, the science behind puberty, periods. It's not specific to anybody in particular. A lot of the books, they do tend to split it up into this is the one for boys, this is the one for girls. Anybody could read this, and there's information about everybody. I had one other issue with it, and maybe this is just me, but the glossary I found incredibly confusing. So it's got quite a kind of comprehensive glossary at the back of the book. But alongside words like testes or safe sex or reproduction, you also had words like nymphomaniac, whore, voyeur. What other ones stood out to me? Sadist. And it's not that these words are in the glossary, it's that they're not referred to at all in the rest of the book. So it's like introducing your child to this vocabulary without providing any kind of context.
And actually the title of the book is Facts of Life Growing Up, and those elements might not be relevant at this stage of growing up.
I don't know why you'd need to know what a sadist is or a voyeur when you're trying to learn a little bit about puberty.
And I think as well, if your child is needing to know those terms or they've heard them and they want to know those terms, it'll be much better coming from you, the answers to what that means, rather than from a book.
Yeah, or at the very least, if the words were then some context was applied within the text of the book. So if I was being brutally honest, I wouldn't recommend this one.
And then lastly, you've got these two, which are both relatively new publications, aren't they? And we were quite excited about them both.
So I've kind of got my notebook here because I did a proper book review. There was quite a lot I wanted to say about these. So this one, The Girl's Guide to Growing Up Great. What actually drew me to this book was the illustrations, because I'm a big fan of Flo Perry. Mm-hmm. And the illustrations are one of the highlights, actually. As I flick through, there's some really nice kind of cartoony style images.
Yeah, I was going to say it's less photographic, so it's less factual in its pictures, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, although it's not unfactual as I kind of go through, but it's kind of cartoony style. It's very inclusive. I love this page on kind of doodling pubic hair. It's sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit fun and playful, absolutely. But here you can see there are more accurate anatomical drawings. So really lovely illustrations of body type, of race. Here's a lovely example of some of the illustrations. And I really like the style of this book. It's informative, but it's really chatty.
So in the way that it's written, in its style, does it sort of appeal more to the older child?
I think it would, yeah, in the way it's written, but also because of the amount of information that's in it. It's really comprehensive. There's a lot of detail in here. And whilst you could obviously dip in and out, I think it would definitely appeal to somebody a little older, range. Probably more secondary age. Yeah, again, it's really hard to put an age on it, but I would imagine more secondary age for this book. I particularly liked, as I said, the chatty style, but also it has excerpts from a doctor and also I think she's a child psychologist. So it mixes up scientific information with
chatty, fun, playful.
Yeah, and information on feelings and
reassurance.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a kind of advice column which I really like. I came across this example. So everyone in my class has smooth legs, but my mum won't let me get rid of the hair on mine. It makes me feel self-conscious and like the odd one out. So it doesn't shy away from some of those real concerns that young people can have as they grow up. So it was really lovely in that regard. I thought it was worth mentioning that it handles sensitively some tricky topics. So included in this book are conversations about masturbation, about eating disorders and gender dysphoria. I particularly like the way they handled eating disorders because they talk about how important it is to have good positive body image and the influence of media on that, and also about the relationship between our feelings and food and how that can be tricky. So I think they handle this information really well. If I were to have one criticism, and it would be tiny, it's that when it's talking about periods and period protection, it mentions sanitary products, tampons, towels. It's not up to date enough to include things like period pants and more environmentally friendly products that are available, moon cups, that kind of thing, which would have been a nice addition. But that's really a tiny thing, yeah. So I was a big fan of this book, and this one is its kind of counterpart, I guess.
Yeah, not that they're linked in any way publishing-wise.
No, not at all. So
this interestingly, obviously that's aimed at girls. Does it talk at all about boys in it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it talk about the anatomy of boys and men? And
it does have a section about boys. I found the section of boys a little bit stereotypical, actually, from memory. I'll see if I can find it. But no, it does have a section on boys, not in a great deal of detail. So it's got names for boys' bits, and it's got some illustrations, and talks about the process of puberty for boys is a bit different, although some things are the same for all of us. And it does start to talk about relationships and having those feelings of attraction to members of the same sex, members of the opposite sex, and handles that really nicely as well. The importance of friendship, but also enjoying being young, actually, and not worrying too much about that kind of thing. So that's nice.
So the kind of what we've called the male counterpart, and I thought it did particularly well in sort of talking about girls in this. It didn't shy away from talking about periods, even though it's sort of aimed at boys, which I think was really interesting and important. We really believe that talking about periods, for example, is really important to talk to boys and girls, because actually it's going to be relevant for them later. It could potentially be relevant for them later in life, and it's nice for them to understand and to not think of it as a kind of a girl issue that's secret.
I was about to say it takes away the shame, because I think sometimes there's this idea that periods are dirty, secretive, as you said, shameful, and I think the more open we are about it with everybody, the more that kind of idea gets in the past. It also covers, as well as the kind of standard topics, it covers puberty, it covers sexual intercourse, it also really focuses on emotions and feelings.
Which is so nice to see that kind of enjoyed and celebrated in a boy's book, actually.
Yeah, it talks quite explicitly about mental health. And actually, I can probably just read the back in terms of content. It says, from dealing with body hair and looking after your skin to forming good friendships and taking care of your mental health, this is a modern day essential guide to growing up for boys. It's written by Dr. Ranj, who you may recognise from the television. We're big fans of Dr. Ranj, aren't we? We like to use his clips quite regularly.
And educators, yeah.
It also, really importantly, doesn't shy away from talking about porn. It's so important that we are open with our children about the potential influence of porn and the accessibility of porn, not just to our young boys actually, but to children in general. I think
and also about sexually explicit material on social media, or even just slightly risque stuff that can influence us and can knock our self-confidence.
Yeah, he talks about something like 50% of 11 to 13-year-olds have already seen pornography or sexually explicit material. It's really important that he just talks about this. I read somewhere the other day that we as parents need to be as accessible to our children as pornography is. Because if they want to find out information, and of course that's perfectly natural that they're curious, we would much rather they came to us to ask their questions. So we need to be open, we need to be approachable, we need to be prepared to answer the questions and let them know that it's fine to ask them. We don't want them seeking those questions.
And by all means, give them one of these books, but don't just have a one-off conversation. Keep it an ongoing conversation, preferably a conversation that kind of starts when they're young and just develops really naturally over the years, and use this material to kind of back up what you're saying and to help them be able to explore it a little bit more on their own as well.
Absolutely. A book is not a substitute for a conversation, in fact, several conversations. But we do hope that this has been helpful and given you an idea of some of the reading material that's available to you to help you chat through growing up with your child.
Thank you for watching.